Hell yeah. Community, the operational force has lost its foothold within the United States as to who we are and what we are. And a part of that goes into the whole idea of mental health. There's this kind of like predisposition that, you know, anybody that goes into the military is like automatically slated as sick or ill, and we don't control that narrative. And while mental health does encompass a lot of who we are and the things that we've experienced, I think a lot of it has to deal with the undermining of ethical standards, the transition of mainstream narratives, going from things like a religious narrative, but also the ethical breakdown. We become very emotive, just very emotional based, no longer facts, relativistic. Everything is about me and how I see it, solipsistic, one-dimensional views. And I think that's very dangerous coming from isolated warrior societies where it's mainly virtue ethics based. Everything is about context. Everything is about the greater good. And whenever those kinds of ethical templates collide, typically it doesn't end very well for us, as we've seen the past 15 years since the VA started documenting suicides and just the overall breakdown. And so that's kind of like where we're at with just this platform. And there's just a lot of fucked up shit going on out there that needs to be brought to light. And I think this platform here gives people voices that need to be heard out, at least in a way that's conducive and somewhat finding common ground. So whatever you want to talk on, I really wanted to pick your brain. Because for one, you know, when I was a boot, dude, like we never had the opportunity to talk to any of the senior guys without, you know, standing at parade rest. Or anytime we try to like extract any kind of substance, it was like, lock yourself. Who the fuck do you think you're talking to or whatever? And so it kind of sucked, but I understood, you know, there was a subculture of customs and courtesies. And I think now, how long have you been out?
Oh, God. I got out in 2008, and that was even with an extension.
Wow. Yeah. So all these years, now is a good time to track back and try to identify some of those critical things that are very, very important to us and just the overall community, man. So I appreciate you coming on and sharing with us, you know, whatever you want to share.
No, I'm all about it. I totally think podcasts are like the greatest source of information now that we've really got that's accessible to everybody. So I'm all about it.
Dope. Yeah. So, man, if you wouldn't mind, man, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're at today.
Yeah, I kind of think obviously we know you in a little bit about your background, but for anybody that might listen and don't know you, if you could just give kind of a review on joining the service, what led you into that, and then your experiences in that time frame, and then after, whatever you want to go into. But
sure.
So I'll kind of give you a little bit of an intro. Henry was when myself and her joined the Marine Corps. Henry was already there for, I believe, you were on one previous deployment to Iraq when we showed up.
Let's see, y'all's first would have been the Surge 06, correct? Ramadi was your first?
Yeah.
Okay, so if Ramadi was your first, then Ramadi was my third.
Oh, okay. Wow. All right. Yeah. Well, I didn't know that, but Henry was a senior guy to us and taught us a lot of things. Deployed with us to Ramadi, Iraq, which we can go into some of that. But I think, like Herrera was saying, since you were senior to us, we didn't really get to connect on that level during the time frame and kind of know all of your experience before we showed up. So if you want to just go ahead and get into that.
Sure. So I grew up Western Carolina out in the mountains. I think that has a lot of contextual, it matters for who I am and how I think. And it's kind of like you mentioned, sitting at parade rest with senior guys. I understand the need for certain conventions. I tried to always not be that guy. Reason being, I think a lot of times, a lot of those conventions are just, without calling anybody out, a weaker way of asserting where your position is in a pecking order. I would much prefer what I could provide show itself and demonstrate my value that could be added and get respect in you listening, and based off that. So that's how I've looked at civilian career and the military. I never really planned on it being career. It never was. It was never my plan. My family, at least one male out of every generation since the Revolutionary War, when they were just Scottish hooking up with Cherokee out in the mountains. Ever since then, at least one's been in. So it was a logical choice for me. I was like a stupid teenager, kind of excited when war started about the time I was coming of age. I think it's a very immature and unhealthy thing to be excited about, but in brutal honesty and right, we're all the sum of everything that ever mattered to us. For me, I was excited in a stupid way, but my paternal grandpa had been, before the U.S. got in World War II, he went to Canada so he could join the Canadian Army and go fight for the Queen sooner. He was captured while a member of the Queen's Rifles for the Canadian Army and escaped that time. Then the U.S. got in the war and he was recalled back to the U.S. at the threat of losing his citizenship. So he joined the American Army, then went back and this time fought in Africa, got captured under Rommel's forces. And then at one point, it's actually a really cool story that they didn't even know until I was coming kind of 13 or 14. He and one of his brothers, who was Army Air Corps at the time, my grandpa was on a prisoner transport train in, I want to say, Libya. And my great uncle was flying reconnaissance, saw this train with the POW markings on the top of the cars that the prisoners used to do, and didn't, drop anything or didn't try to interfere with the path, but reported it back. And they found out in the late 80s, early 90s that he was looking at the train his brother was on.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
I always thought that was cool. And yeah, right. It's a small world that two hillbillies from the mountains ended up running into each other. Well, not running into each other, but being in the same place in Libya, one of the largest wars in world history. So I grew up with, his stories and never any of the bad things. But one thing that resonated with me, he talked about the flying fish when he was in the Mediterranean on a troop transport. And my first deployment was 2/8 MEU in 2005. And I remember going through the Med. I was always I like the group for a lot of things, but I also like my own time. So I made friends with some gunners mates on the LPD 15, the Ponce that Fox Company was on. And I would go hide near the forecastle, the pointy end of the ship. They had these barrels that you couldn't be seen from above. So I would kind of creep under there. The sailors wouldn't rat me out. And I had a Sony Discman with like 3 CDs. And I would just sit there listening to that for days and days and days, right? Yeah, right, dating it a little bit. But I remember I saw those flying fish in the Med, And that kind of connected like my entire path. Like everything made sense because of those stupid flying fish. Because it's, one of the stories I remember from being a kid. Yeah. But after my grandpa was captured the second time, he was eventually saved by the Brits. And then, ironically, since he used to be on their side with them, I should say. But after that, he got out. He spent a total, and I meant to read this beforehand to be exact, but I want to say around 18 to 20 months as a prisoner total in World War II. Wow. And then got home and was just kind of a county legend kind of deal. But I grew up with him and just hearing the stories, walking around like you would expect every stereotype of Western Carolina to be, walking around in the woods, shooting random things he'd point out for me. And I grew up with a rifle and hearing his story. So it was kind of a logical step for me. Got in the Marines. I chose the Marines because it was the one recruiter that didn't kiss my ass. Like no family history of the Marine Corps, but every branch I talked to, it was kind of, in hindsight, they're filling the quota for what they need at the time, which completely understandable. Needs of the military should come before the needs of the individual in that case. That's why you sign a contract, right? That said, I think with the Navy, they wanted me to do nuke school or something like that. And the Army was trying to get me in some kind of rotor wing deal, if I remember. I don't remember what the Air Force wanted, but I remember it was not appealing at all. And the first thing Staff Sergeant Mark Powell ever said to me when I opened the door was, "Get the hell out." And when I said, "Well, sir, I'd like to talk to you," he said, "Well, I was just seeing if you're a bitch. Come on in." So
that's awesome. Right. Yeah.
So of course, at the time, I think I had just turned 17, I want to say. So at that time, being that age in a very, very, masculine Appalachian culture, that of course was immediately like, hell no, I like this guy. I want to prove myself. So that sold me on that. Infantry wasn't even like there was no interest in any other field whatsoever. I couldn't imagine myself doing anything else. And I thought it would be the challenge that I needed and that I wanted and kind of make my own legend like my grandpa had been. So went through boot camp, did that little thing, infantry school, all that, ended up in 2-8. And the funny thing is so two quick Marine funny stories. I never stepped on the yellow footprints and I never graduated infantry school. So Western Carolina being the 7 westernmost counties of North Carolina at that time, now maybe still, I don't know, had one recruiter for every branch except for the Army had 3. So there weren't a lot of us joining from there, right? So when I went to, what was it? Wherever it was, for us, it was Raleigh, but whatever that state level thing they send you to right before you go to boot camp, the name escapes me. But when I went to that, we ended up on a rented van with a lady chain smoking the whole way that took me, my buddy from high school, and like 5 other guys down to Parris Island, right? So she got lost at some point. Of course, this is, pre-GPS, pre a phone that you could even, a phone was still the Nokia brick at the time. So there's not much we could do about it, but she was lost. So by the time we got to Parris Island, sun's almost up. The buses are gone. We see the yellow footprints and these portals pass through. That whole doorway thing was shut and there's nobody outside. And I'll never forget looking at this lady and saying, "Hey, what do we do? Like, I feel like we should get out. Obviously we have to at some point, but what do we do?" We're all scared shitless. So I'll never forget this lady had those Virginia Slim, super long old lady cigarettes. And she took it out of her mouth long enough to look back and say, "This is my first time doing this, but you should probably get the fuck out." So, okay. So 6 or 7 of us get out. And I remember we were like, "Well, do we go to the footprints? Like, that's the thing, right? You're supposed to do that." Well, before we could do anything, this flying ninja kick swings those doors open and some killhad comes running out and grabs us, runs us in. I don't remember much after that specifically, but I'll never forget that moment of feeling kind of cheated that I didn't get to do the footprints. And then in SOI, so in my SOI class that came with me, you had Jackson, who's a gunner now, Hyvik, Jeske, like that whole crew. We were all in SOI together. When we were waiting to graduate, I remember like a week and a half before graduation from school infantry, they came to us and said, "Hey, we've got 2 units," and one was 2-8. I don't remember what the other was, so bear with me on that one. But they came to us and said, "Hey, if you guys want to leave now, they've got a thing that's part of their workup. They're going to be deploying soon. If you want to do it, here's your chance. Well, of course, at this time in 2004 still, we were all under the impression, man, we got like maybe 1 year left of war and it's going to be gone. So piss on the recon and doc, piss on trying for this. Like, we need to get there before this shit's over because we're going to miss it, right? Hindsight being 2020, forever war, right? But we all were like, hell yeah, I'll get on that bus. And what they split us on was, I believe, last name. So latter half of last names got on one bus, including my buddy from high school. First letter of the other name ends up getting on the bus going to 2-8. And I remember thinking, oh man, this is, it's finally it. Like, yeah. So that was the funny thing. Never graduated infantry school for real, and never stepped on the yellow footprints. I don't even know if technically I'm really a Marine. I guess they just kind of let me keep going.
That's crazy.
Isn't that funny? Yeah. So get to 2-8. The fleet was, of course, a culture shock. And just, the entire Marine Corps is a culture shock. I think the infantry itself being its own little subculture within a subculture is interesting, right? So got there, kind of found my place relatively quickly, got pretty comfortable. The first night in the fleet was actually a Chinese field day. I'll never forget this either. So Chinese field day, and being a dumb, PFC, not knowing anything. I wasn't even a PFC yet. I think I was still private, but showing up, and I remember they put me with one corporal, and I'll leave names out, but they put me with one NCO, and they're like, you're going to bunk with him. And I was thinking, well, that's a little weird. They'd put a new guy with a corporal, but okay, whatever. So I get there and he goes, hey, I've got to run to the C-store. I'll get you some Red Bull. You start cleaning. I'll be back. Okay. So I start cleaning the room, right? Eventually he shows back up. I've never had an energy drink before. So I down 4 Red Bulls, get that room clean. Yeah. Right. Yeah. This isn't when energy drinks were everywhere. They were kind of a new thing still, or at least to me they were. So, I remember I finished cleaning that room and they were like, oh no, we're idiots. Your name's not in this room. It's supposed to be on this room with this other NCO. So short version of that, I ended up cleaning 3 or 4 different NCOs' rooms that night, dragging all their stuff down to the quad area before finally they were like, of course you're not going to bunk with us, Boot. You're down there, right? So I think that was the moment that it sunk in for me. Okay, you got to pay your dues, is what it is. But I like to think that kind of started my path of being like, okay, well, I understand the need for some of this convention, but at the same time, I'm not going to be the guy that fucks with people to fuck with people. And I like to think I never was. The MEU, especially in the platoon I was in within Fox Company, was a very, I'll say hazing for the sake of hazing in some ways. And in some ways, the positive kind that just is kind of necessary for time. In some ways wasn't and was overblown. And with that, it just that was probably the moment that it sunk in for me. Yeah, really good dudes are here and get promoted and do awesome, amazing things. But there are some fucking idiots that just exist long enough to keep climbing too. So maybe this is not going to be me forever. I'm probably just going to do this one enlistment and be done. And I know I'm not the only one from that specific platoon that had that thought. So that was kind of undersold me on the Marine Corps. The MEU was incredible, seeing 16, 17 different countries, the Libo ports, just the culture of the rest of the world. And I was always, intrigued by that, mostly because of my grandpa and books and stuff. So that was a really cool experience and showed me, man, like exploring the world may be my thing, even if it's not with the military. I dig this. This is cool. So I would never trade any of that experience for anything, just like the Marine Corps, and like we would all say, I'm sure. So that went very well. Got back from the MEU. That time in Iraq, we spent a couple of months on the ground in Iraq at a Camp Buka, which was a prison camp down there that eventually I heard grew bigger than Abu Ghraib. And there's some funny stories where they used us as, I believe it was 3rd platoon specifically. I was 2nd platoon, but they used a bunch of guys from Fox to be the role players in yellow jumpsuits against the Air Force security forces and guardsmen that were the security for that prison. And I don't know if y'all ever heard any of the stories from that time. Somewhere on a hard drive that I've yet to find again, and I know it's somewhere in this house, but I have videos of us just destroying, just shit mixing these guys. They had some tents they put up to be like, simulate the camp. And I don't remember who it was. I want to say it was one of the 3rd platoon guys. but within 2 minutes, both tents were on fire. And then these are those massive, like thick cotton Kuwaiti tents, and these things are just torching to the ground, right? So, of course, that amps everybody up. They had their shotguns, but they weren't loaded with the bean bags, but they did have shields and clubs and stuff, and they were not ashamed to use them. So what ended up happening would be they would push through the line of Marines, just tackling, hurting, whatever. We were trying to make wedges, break through, do anything we could. Once they would get past, other guys from Fox were coming around with Leathermans and cutting the zip ties on guys that had already been grounded, and they were coming back up from behind. So it ended up like a little envelopment. It's good training, right? So that may have been one of the most violent things I've ever seen. It was really Marines versus everybody else. And as camaraderie goes, I think that was probably the closest I ever saw a Fox company on that deployment. It was just taking it to the Air Force and guardsmen. And I remember one particular tiny little Air Force redhead lady that had to have been a little old to be there. She may have been 27, 28, but tiny, like 4'11". Her riot helmet looked like Spaceballs. Like, it was ridiculous. I don't remember who it was that tackled her, but I remember as soon as I saw the contact, I assumed she was dead. And when she got up, it was like everybody breathed a little bit of a sigh of relief, right? Like, we thought she was a goner. So the MEU was, mainly that. Very sometime outside the wire, but by that time, the major push was past us. So it wasn't really, and this was early 05. So while Iraq was still very, very intense, at that point, it really wasn't for us. I think some guys found some weapons in vehicles. A couple people were detained. We got mortared a few times, but nothing too crazy. I believe rocketed once or twice. They had a giant cell phone tower in the middle of that camp that, I think that was like the aiming stake, and they were working on taking it down. But to this day, that was the biggest cell tower I've ever seen. I'd be lying to say how tall it was, but I remember just the base of it was as big around as a damn Walmart. It was massive.
Damn.
Henry, can I just bump into just for myself to kind of, lay the timeline out. So that was in 2005. That's interesting to me that they sent 2.8 on that MEU with the war still. I mean, Ramadi hadn't even really started yet at that point. I know you.
No.
So where did 2.8 before you got there? Where was their previous deployment to?
Before I got there, when I got there, they had just a couple months prior gotten back from Afghanistan.
Oh, wow.
And I know,
yeah,
I know a lot of the guys from that deployment, obviously, and still friends with quite a few. I can't say for sure where they were. I knew at some point, but I just honestly at this point, it's one of those things lost in the sauce. But it was weird for us going on a MEU as well. And I remember all the senior guys to me at the time were saying, hey, even though this is a MEU, like, we're in the Gulf, they're going to push us north, they're going to need us. Right. And I think it was probably one of those you slip through the cracks things where it was logical that that battle group was going and they had to have a contingent of Marines. So with us going on that, with Fox being the track company, which being on tracks was just dog shit. I hated those stupid things. Those AAVs were trash, ours especially. But of course, you know how it goes. Everybody, whatever you had was the worst thing in the military. So not the worst job ever, but it definitely sucked. And I remember everyone on a track when you would splash, especially training off the coast. I want to say we were off Morehead City somewhere. But wherever we were splashing for training in like January, those SEALs in the top would just dump salt water. You'd get to shore and, it was supposed to be the world's finest fighting force. And that back ramp would get lowered, just seawater washing out. Some of us would flush out with it, gear and packs everywhere. It was just, it was one of those that really, if you didn't appreciate the fact that humor was the only thing that was going to save you, it would have driven you insane. But I do think that deployment, we probably were initially intended for something different, but you know how it goes. We definitely weren't used to the capacity we could have been, but I know at that time we were told our mission was mainly they had quite a few riots in the prison compound, and they were improvised weapons. They were making shivs and asking for shovels and digging tunnels. And there was like a moat in the camp around that prison compound where we were outside of it. And we would patrol around that sometimes. And we actually did find one guy trying to tunnel out once, and he fell in about a 30-foot pit of sea wire the guard had been throwing in there. I didn't see them get him out, but I know when they got him out, they had to do it with a winch and a crane.
Whoa.
And cut the wire around him. So,
oh, geez.
Yeah, not sure whatever happened with him, but judging by the living conditions, I would imagine probably some sort of death by infection. So probably not the best move ever. But yeah, we really, again, the Libo ports were incredible. We were in Iraq, we were contributing, but definitely not at the capacity any of us wanted or expected to be. So that, along with the chain of command at some points, not overall, but specific to us, I think led to some, resentment and maybe disillusionment with some guys. The next deployment was the total inverse. That was when we got Captain Mingus and First Sergeant Williamson. And I can honestly say, like, to this day, two men that I have very little, there's no way I could have more respect for two individuals. I've met very few people of that caliber since. And I can't say enough good about them. And I think that 06, 07, we were just on the outskirts of Fallujah. That deployment, there's no way I see fathomable that without the two of them and some other people in the chain of command, without them, I just can't imagine a way we would have left with Fox being, as I understand it, if I'm remembering correctly, the only company with no KIA. We had quite a few wounded. We were mortared a few times a week, it seemed like. And tiny little outpost. OP Viking was maybe the size of 2 football fields, maybe 3, not particularly big, right off MSR Mobile on the outskirts of Fallujah proper. It was a lot of, it was the inverse of the MU. We had a much more aggressive chain of command. We were much more aggressive. We had a rotation for a while where if you weren't outside the wire, staying in them. We stayed in chicken coops, local houses, top of sand dunes. Didn't matter. We found something. We stayed out all the time. Sometimes smaller groups. The smallest I ever broke off from a squad size element was like 4 or 5 overnight. That's actually a funny story I might say here in a little bit. But broke off into those smaller groups, did stuff like that. And we absolutely owned that AO. Like we relieved an Army unit, if I'm not mistaken. I'm fairly certain it was Army unit. And they had taken casualties, I believe regimental wide up until the day we replaced them. I believe they lost a captain. This may have been a little bit of, word of mouth going, but I know they had lost a captain at least within the week before we got there. And for us to, again, take wounded but no KIA, that's not a coincidence, right? Like, it was very high tempo, but without a doubt, Captain Mingus, First Sergeant Williamson, when he got there, all those guys, they absolutely kept us alive. Like, there's no other way.
And wasn't Captain Mingus a Mustang?
Yes, Captain Mingus was a Mustang. He had come, I'm fairly certain, from recon. I want to say, during his enlisted time. And we had jokes, grand old man of the Marine Corps, Captain Mingus did this, Captain Mingus did that, all that kind of stuff. And a great guy. Forgive me, my little ones keep peeking in. So he, Captain Mingus had been a Mustang, and I want to say he's got a farm down somewhere near coastal Carolina now. I want to say, and we've all, of course, talked about getting reunions just like we all do all the time. And that deployment would be the one that, like, the one I hear the most about. Hey, let's get this crew back together. Is that 06, 07 deployment? It's logical. It was by far the most aggressive time that I've had in the military.
Yeah, I remember you guys, when we were boots to the, getting to the fleet after you guys came back from that, he was still around for a little while. And it wasn't until after, like, before I was getting out, how I kind of reflected on that. And I was like, because our chain of command situation for the Afghanistan deployment was the 09 one was definitely very different. And I remember thinking about just how much you guys, all of my senior guys, respected him and First Sergeant, which was ended up being Sergeant Major
yeah.
But yeah, I mean, and I was thinking about that after, like, before I was about to get out, and I was like, man, going through what we went through and just how different your experience can be when you're with someone that you truly, felt like cared about you and, was just a great leader. Not that I experienced that with him, but I just thought all of my senior guys felt the same way about him, about Captain Ming.
We used to joke if he told us to march on Baghdad and then keep on going to Tehran, we would have followed him. And honestly, I think we would have, and I think we probably could have. And again, that was honestly up to battalion level. Like I obviously didn't have a lot of interaction with the battalion commander, but I just know Captain Mingus was pretty much allowed to do what he saw fit in RAO and did. And again, it was high tempo, so there were absolutely times that we were kind of strung out and tired. And you know, I'll admit myself a few times I was, fuck that. Like this is getting, I'm tired, you know. But at the same time, you know, hindsight being 2020 again, I can't say anything negative about it as I look back. Like we were very fortunate, and even though more than a few guys got hurt pretty significantly in some cases, there's no doubt in my mind it would have been significantly worse with any other CO, any other first sergeant, you know, any other platoon leaders. Like it was the perfect confluence of like exactly what we needed in the AO we were in, and we were all very proud to be there. I think another thing that made a drastic difference was that was around the time, and I don't know how Marine Corps wide this was, but I know it carried through 8th Marines, at least, if I'm not mistaken, where they broke us up from 3 platoons and a weapons platoon into 4 platoons. And, you know, methodology of the, you know, regular Marine Corps changes all the time. So I know it's went back and forth to the old convention since then. But at that time for that deployment, I think that was a huge contributor to just everything being better, right? With all the breakdown, most everything we did was within 4 gun trucks, right? So you're either on foot or 4 gun trucks. And with the gun trucks, having the 31s broken up from not just being in weapons platoons scattered across the line platoons, obviously that adds a higher level of proficiency with those belt feds, those crew served weapons. Mortars got rolled into headquarters platoon. They still got theirs, and they, you know, had a very effective mortar position inside our outpost. A lot of good guys in that as well. I think that breaking down, that delineation of everything, spreading the skill sets across, absolutely contributed to how successful we were as well. So real happy about that. Not to mention going into 4th platoon, I was ecstatic that I was one of the ones picked for that. And at the time, they told me it was because I was their kind of asshole. You know, whether that's true or not, I ended up where I wanted to be, and I was very happy with every facet of my chain of command in that regard. So super happy to have been there as well. But, you know, after that deployment, I remember we got back, and there had been a few, you know, Doc Kirby that took one of the jaw had come from Fox, and then at that time was in weapons. And, you know, his story has been national news a few times, and that was that deployment as well. So it was definitely a 180 for 2-8 in its entirety, coming from the MU going to that deployment. And it was an awakening in a lot of ways for a lot of us. And it is what I can honestly say motivated me, that when we got back and that 3rd deployment came around, you know, I know some elements of the chain of command were saying, oh, Ramadi's nothing now. You know, Ramadi's laid back, Ramadi's casual. We were walking around with our helmets off when we went on, you know, the Advon and all that. And I know, you know, not saying too much about that. I didn't really like saying that, because even though I had not personally been to Ramadi before then, I knew a lot of friends in other battalions that had, and I didn't like the idea of setting it up as a skate deployment. And I think that's what made me and a few others do that extension. So what had happened was, and it was actually First Sergeant Williamson at the time, came to us and just asked for people that would voluntarily extend, because so many of us were getting out. It was going to be all you guys. And y'all's group had a lot of great dudes, but it was just one of those things where, you know, there's a lot of boots on a new deployment. So when they asked us, I know 7 or 8 of us pretty much immediately said yes. And I remember looking at it after the 2nd deployment, I kind of felt fortunate that I hadn't been wounded, that none of us had been killed, that kind of stuff. And, you know, it's always Semper Fi, but every now and then you've got that little back of your mind, like, hey, I want to live through this, right? So I think I was a little apprehensive about going back again. But I remember at one point thinking about my grandpa again, and, you know, the tribulations he went through, that there are very few people left on earth that have been through that level of just hell in every regard. thinking about him, thinking about, if I was an old man, did I want to look back and say, well, I went twice and they kind of needed me or asked me to go a third time, but I was scared. I looked at it more of, I would rather be dead and have done something I believed in than be a coward and live forever. So decided to go on that one. I remember my family was exceedingly upset, including a German step grandma that I could always tell when she was mad when she went off in German. There was a lot of German when I said I extended to go on that third one. But she never let me live that down until she passed away a few years ago. But went on that deployment. Y'all remember that one. I ended up being asked to be on the pit team, and it was because they had sent me to a little crash Arabic course. And it was funny. I don't know how they picked that, like who was going to go to that, but it was interesting that a lot of the same kind of asshole I was from other companies were picked. So we all showed up and were like, hey, you're the dickhead that I hung out with on the Mew. I remember you, So they may have profiled a certain personality that they liked for that, but, went to that, get put on the pit team for that Ramadi deployment. And honestly, I can say that was probably the most, I was really, really thankful to have the contrast, right? Because Ramadi didn't end up being, relatively laid back. We had a couple little scares and things, but we definitely weren't getting mortared and shot at every other day. So that was nice. But I felt very happy to have worked closely with the Iraqis. I actually kind of used to catch a little shit because I would go down, I would grab one Marine because there weren't a lot of us. Before the unfortunate V bid for our sister company, before that, we were a relatively small group. I don't know, the pit team was 7 or 8 guys, and we had one small QRF element that I believe one of y'all were on, I want to say. But, at Malab.
Yeah. I know you had Schmidt. Who'd you have? Schmidt, Turpin was there in the
Schmidt,
pit.
Turpin, me, Staff Sergeant Brown.
Brown, yep.
Clark, Sergeant Clark.
Wasn't not McGuire, other big blonde-headed dude from 3rd Platoon, I think. No, he was on one of the cat or mobile. Anyway.
Yeah.
So, I remember I wanted to kind of ask you a little bit because you're tapping into stuff that we're familiar with now. How did that go? I know you're a weapons guy and not weapons platoon, but just your background is. So I kind of figured that's why they picked you to do that, to train these guys. But I remember seeing you in Malab, like doing gun drills with these Iraqi police guys. God. Most of them were insurgents. I mean, most of them were insurgents. But
so in a lot of ways, the Arabic school was why they picked me for the pit team. I think a little bonus they were happy about was I was the only guy in Fox Company who knew how to take apart and fix AKs. Wow. I think, Appalachia, right? So I did grow up in a very firearm centric community and family. So playing around with that, I ended up being put over the motor pool, which I am not I know a lot more now, but at the time I was not a mechanic by any stretch. And then they gave me the armory. So the pit team, the way they broke it up, everybody had like our little specialty area. I got the armory, motor pool, and I want to say Schmidt and Turpin had physical training and CQB, and we all kind of helped a little bit with that, depending on the day and what we were doing, and just trying to keep the facility up, teach them, what we were told to do was, teach them pride in service and all that other stuff. And, you can't take an entirely different culture and just immediately go, hey, be proud of this building now that you don't really give a shit about like we do, but figure it out, It wasn't going to work that way. That said, a lot of them were insurgents and were shitbags. That said, there were a few that were actually good dudes that just wanted to look out for their family. And I can honestly say that deployment changed my life in a lot of ways because, I would grab one other, I'd grab somebody junior to me or grab another guy from the pit team. And I ate more dinners with the Iraqis in the armory and the little motor T office they had. I spent more time down there than I did with Americans for essentially the whole deployment. And I was really thankful for that because I saw a contrast of, there, but for where we were born, go I, you know what I mean? Them being Muslim, the majority of us being Christian, them being holding their beliefs and their family values and their culture this way, us, you know, it's a lottery for where you're born that makes most of us different. And I think that was incredibly beneficial for me and for personal development. But that close relationship and rapport actually got us some decent intel a few times. And not just me specifically, you know, you had awesome guys on the pit team like Sergeant Clark. You can't say enough nice things about Clark. You had him, you had, you know, Turpin, newer guy, but just shit hot at what he did. You had Thomason, who picked things. That's who it was. Thomason picked up things fairly quickly. Schmidt was just, you know, big. Schmidt's still in. I want to say he's like a guard, acting first sergeant.
He's in the Army. I know he was more. He went in the Army, and that was my fire team leader when I was straight to the East. So I talked to him. I was chatting with him a couple months ago, but I think he is like a first sergeant or something now. But yeah, he went Army mortars. Did a couple deployments with them, and then he's still in though.
Yeah, I knew he's still in. I believe he was actually acting first sergeant at one element for the DC Capitol thing or whatever, which that whole shit mess. But yeah. He was definitely awesome to have out there, and I think the pit team accidentally worked out to have a really good balance of like all of us were aggressive and assholes in our own little ways, but they complemented like where one of us would be super amped about one thing, the others would be a little mellow about it. And it just it worked out where everybody's different personalities just meshed, you know, really well, and lucky in a lot of ways. And, you know, maybe by design in a lot of ways, because there's a lot of things that I look back on that seemed not just on that deployment, but on my entire time in the Marine Corps, where you look back and you go, man, everything just kind of fell into place. At the time, you think that, and then as time goes on, you look back and you go, no, you know, this guy knew me this about me, or I knew that about that guy. So a lot of things weren't quite as serendipitous as we may all like to think. But either way, you know, it worked really well. And like I said, it definitely changed how I looked at the rest of the world for the rest of my life. Like there's no way. So if I, you know, the camaraderie from the Marine Corps, the brotherhood is obviously the greatest gift anybody can be given. I think a close second is, especially for me, my second deployment, that Fallujah area one, that at one point, you know, cliched, but accepting that, oh, this is probably the one I'm screwed on. And then you don't die. So you come back and you kind of have a new lease on, well, if that didn't get me, shit, nothing's going to. I think that's another gift. But I think just that, you know, being a tiny little rural mountain kid and kind of seeing the world in that way and getting to interact more interpersonally with those people was of huge benefit and has definitely shaped my life going forward since.
Yeah, it kind of seems, just from, you know, I wasn't aware of that you went on the MEU. But it seems like your 3 deployments kind of were modern day Marine Corps. Like you almost checked every box. You got to do a MEU, you got to do a legit combat deployment, and then you kind of got to do a rebuild phase type almost deployment as well. So it wasn't like you were just banging brass the whole time you were in. You kind of did a little bit of all of it, which we didn't, you know, we never got to go on a MEU or anything, which I wish I would have done. That would have been a cool to see that side of it. But like you did your work, fuck tracks. I agree with that statement, but you know, you got to train in AAVs. You got to do all that amphibious type training where we kind of missed out on that. And
I think it is kind of cool to have done that amphibious thing. Like, you know, I remember every time we bitched about it, I don't remember who it was, of one of my senior guys that would have been gone by the time y'all got there. But anytime we did anything amphibious like that, he would say, what are you bitching for when you're cold and wet? This is literally what the Marine Corps is supposed to be. And
right.
As much as I hated to hear it, he was right. And, you know, I remember how cold the ocean was every time we did it. And I remember when we were doing the workup, I also remember how those little prickly bushes on coastal Carolina and Virginia, you know, those little prickly bushes just past the sand. I remember doing buddy rushes in those for just days and days and days. and like every crevice in your body, your ear hole to your ass crack, having those little prickles in there somehow. And, funny thing about the splashing thing, we actually didn't even land in Kuwait in the AAVs. I remember the LPD. So the front end of the ship like opens up, right? And they had this, I don't know any of the terminology, right? Grunt, whatever, but they back up this giant like landing craft that was marginally close to the size of our ship in, displacement, not in height or anything, but they backed this up and they had these big chains. And we're in this well deck. And I remember we had our sea bags on our chest and our packs on our backs and weapons and everything kind of on your side. And we were just in rows, like packed in, right? And what they told us was, hey, when we say go, one row, jump from the ship onto that. But if you hit the water, sink. Don't try to swim up, because once these two come together, they're going to pop you like a grape. I remember thinking, shit, don't fall in the water. And because they're like, they said, if you go in, don't try to drop shit and just swim up because you're going to get crushed. So just sink as much as you can and then swim to the side. And, of course, all of us looking around like, shit, don't die right before you get to Kuwait,
Yeah, that's some Marine Corps shit right there.
It is. It went smooth. But, that's that moment. I think I have a moment from each of the 3 deployments that I flash back on when every now and then you're like, man, this sucks. You can flash back to that and go, this is way better than that, though. So, okay, yeah, I'm good. Yeah. But got back from that 3rd deployment. And at that time, got back. I knew I was going to get out. Didn't know what I wanted to do, where I wanted to go. College was never really my thing. I'm all about reading and learning and everything. I am, as funny as it is joining the military, I really don't like being told what to do. And I didn't mind it in the military way. And it's not that, oh, somebody tells me what to do, I'm ready. It's not like that, not posturing in that sense. But a prime example would be any professional certification I've got, whether it be in the gun industry or in the fitness industry or whatever I've done, I do nothing but study things on my own time. But as soon as I pay money and someone is giving me a certification, I have to force myself to do whatever the curriculum is, because there's this mental block that I don't know if it's just ingrained Appalachian American or whatever, but there's some little mental block of, well, you told me to do it, so fuck yourself. I'm not touching it. I've always been like that. So I know college would just be a waste of my time and the government's money. So, got out and I went, well, the only things I've ever really been good at are shooting stuff and talking to people. So if I'm not going to do the military anymore, what am I going to do? Well, I ended up stumbling into a job for a major gun company. I refrained from saying the name because the culture of that company was on the decline. Their quality absolutely went to shit and they have never recovered. So I spent too many years there trying to build my way up until I got to a position that I could, impact it in a positive way. Didn't work out that way. So went my separate way from that. Spent about around a year working at an asphalt terminal, right? Because I just remembered when I was a kid, my grandpa always told me there's no such thing as no work. So while I was figuring out whatever my next thing in the gun industry was, same thing. He also told me you're never too good for any job. So I dug asphalt for a year because that's what job there was, paid decent money. That's around the time my daughter was born. I was just focused on being a dad. So did that for about a year, then ended up going to a startup not far outside Fort Bragg. I was commuting pretty far from where I am in Central Carolina now. Spent a couple years there, then got recruited to a startup pistol company with a new design out of Austin, the Austin, Texas area. So spent a few years in Texas, startups doing what startups do. There were some issues, not with the design. To this day, still the best pistol I've ever held, but kind of came back in between. I had gotten into competitive shooting for years. I did that. And there was a time that I shot probably 4 or 5 matches a month. So every Saturday I was shooting either 3-gun or USPSA, steel challenge, sporting clays. It didn't matter. Give me a gun. I'll figure it out. While I was doing all that, I also kind of got into, the more fitness side of things and realized competitive stuff on that. It's just where I was happy. So competitive shooting kind of helped to get the gig with the Texas company, and I just kind of progressed from there. But yeah, to hop back in, kind of went along those pathways. Once the last startup kind of went the way it did, I moved back to North Carolina to be closer to my daughter. And that was a little over a year ago. So now mainly personal training. I still teach shooting. I teach both carry defensive shooting and to a lesser degree, I teach some people on the competition side. Ultimately, what I'm trying to do is not just the way I view modern culture, but the way I view the kind of fitness level of every facet of military and state, federal, and local peace officers and agencies. I think there is a gap in injuries related to field. So in other words, I've done the research and kind of Excel spreadsheeted to the ability I have of most common injuries to officers, military members of different roles, that kind of stuff. And ultimately what I'm trying to do is get where I can make specific fitness plans for whether it be, a tier 1 guy or a line infantry guy or a motor T mechanic or, a federal agent that's working solo, a local SWAT guy that, whatever. And the injuries, regardless of field or specific field, are actually pretty similar. So I'm just kind of gathering data, building my brand on the fitness side. I've already got a pretty good reputation on the gun side. So just kind of combining the two of, it's one of those where, especially, well, not so much now, I guess, with the new presidency, but previously budgets, rightfully so, being kind of taken down a little bit. I think bang for the buck of what an asset can provide when they are trained specifically to what their role may be, fitness wise, shooting wise, anything else, you can kind of get the best bang for the buck for what you need and what you're spending. And I think as budget constraints go forward and the money's just not there, that will probably translate to something that's useful for a lot of agencies. So I've got quite a few contacts on that side, working on that right now, just the gaming phase. But, if nothing has ever changed about me, I'm still the guy that just likes shooting stuff and exercising.
Nice. Yeah. I remember several conversations at the smoke deck at Malab, and I just always thought you were the guy with the stories, man. You knew the gun stuff, and you were just always like to talk. And like you said, I mean, the whole kind of different way of command and respect from subordinates or whatnot. You were always kind of like that, just easy to talk to, but still had that presence about you that, yeah, I remember those times specifically, but that's awesome, dude. So let me ask you this question, since you probably know quite a bit. Where's all the ammo?
So that question has a lot more nuance than people think. So the big company I worked for was an ammunition manufacturer as well. And obviously industry contacts, I've got a pretty good grasp on a lot of things. The issue is kind of multiple areas. One big thing that a lot of people don't think about is the instability in the Ukraine a few years ago. Well, thanks to the EPA, a lot of our gunpowder doesn't come from here anymore. And one of the largest supplier of the world's gunpowder is the Ukraine. So when people ask why the U.S. would have a vested interest in the Ukraine and staying independent from Russia, gunpowder is a major thing, and in some of the raw materials for gunpowder along those lines. Yeah. And I think, I love nature. Y'all can look on any of my social media stuff. If I can be outside, I'm going to be outside. I actually was with my daughter today. But at the same time, over constraints by government, which is what government's best at. Sorry, I had to throw in a little Appalachia there. But the EPA has drastically limited what capacity we as a nation have in just getting the raw materials to make ammunition. Specifically in the civilian market right now, the issue is, guys like me that have been into shooting forever that even, I've always, when I would get back from deployment, everybody else would buy like the Me Too Mustang and all the other silly stuff. I bought guns and ammo then. When I went out to that Flatwoods Range in Jacksonville, like every Saturday, I didn't have something to do. So with all of the old shooters trying to now go, shit, I've got a bunch, but I want a bunch more. And the influx of new shooters, I forget the exact number. I actually meant to look this up before this, just in case it came up. But 2020 was the largest amount of NICS checks, which is the background check if a gun shop calls in for you to buy a firearm for your 4473 stuff, was incredible increase in those. And the only year close to it was 2019, and the only year close to that was 2018. So just political silliness and the state of the perception people have of the world. This is the safest time in world history, but perception is reality. And with a business media that is intentionally designed to scare you about things, it's made ownership go up. So it's that perfect storm, right? Where we've got a confluence of new shooters and old shooters all trying to gather up everything they can. And if I had $1 for how many text messages I get a day of random people that maybe, somebody I do fitness stuff with, somebody I, just know from around town, people I grew up with, just texting or messaging me on platforms going, "Hey man, can I buy some ammo off you?" And, I hate to keep using it, but I do use the grasshopper and the ant scenario from that old fable when we were kids. I say, "Hey, us ants were putting stuff away when we could." That said, as cost of goods and things go up, you have to think ammunition's heavy. So the freight, the shipping, there's a lot more stuff that goes by rail than people would assume. If you can think about it, it's not logical to move mass amounts of ammunition by flying them, and truck is not that efficient either. So there is an incredible amount of just different issues you've got to deal with in getting things to market, sourcing the raw materials. There's tax. There's for firearms manufacturers, every time you make a new gun, you have to pay what's called a TTB tax, which is around 11% of MSRP. So even though guns are almost never sold at MSRP, you're paying 11% of what you set as your MSRP in tax before you even sell the gun. Wow. So there's a lot, anybody that says it's so easy to do guns, it's very, very difficult, time consuming. The government tries to trip you up in every way it can, and it will tax you. It'll scale that, even us regular people overtaxed have trouble keeping up with. So I've got a lot of friends on the legal side of firearms advocacy, and, they tell you too, they're not going to just ban everything. They're just going to try to make it where you can't afford to do it. And, they've been trying that for decades. So I think gun ownership going up to the degree it has, and information and people just kind of coming around to the idea that it's an inanimate object. There is nothing inherently violent about a firearm. And when occasionally people do, I'll tell you, my daughter's hairbrush here, I'll do way more damage with that than the average American will do with a minigun. So, it's one of those things, it's intent, not the inanimate object. And that's one of those things that I think it's, history and public discourse is going to be on our side. I really do. Ammunition is going to get caught up. It's going to take a little time, but it is going to happen. Cost is going up. So cost to the consumer is going to go up. Back in the days when we were all in 2.8 and I was driving out telling some of you guys, "Hey man, now's the time to be buying ammo." And I would go buy, 1,080 round 10 of 7.62 by 54R Russian, or 5.45 by 39 Russian, all those. I'd buy 1,080 round sealed 10s for less than $100. And, now, even a few years ago before the silliness, but especially now, people are paying over $1 a round for that. So I will say, if the economy were to collapse, or COVID-2 or whatever silliness they want to come up with happens again, I could probably live off selling ammunition for a couple of years if the market stays the way it is. So we'll do what we got to do. But
you're the bullet farm and Mad Max. For real.
Honestly, that's probably where I would identify with.
It would be.
It's it's one of those things where firearms culture used to be so much more ingrained in American culture, with kids in school learning firearm safety. Obviously, guns don't get left around my house, but my 7-year-old is safer than most adults with guns because there's no mysticism to it, right? She has no access to them. But if we go to the range and I leave everything locked open on a bench, she won't touch anything until eyes and ears are on and she asks. And if she sees an Allen wrench sitting around the house, she knows just, it's ingrained. That's something that's been used on a gun. I need to ask daddy if I touch that. So Allen wrenches, screwdrivers, anything she sees, she knows. And again, it's that lack of mysticism. And I think a lot of the problems that we've had in the past few decades have been, leaving the culture of understanding and appreciating firearms for what they are to making them something that these kids only see in movies and video games. And while the argument that video games or movies lead to violence is asinine, at the same time, it does give them a almost mythical aura that I think is more dangerous than the gun itself.
Yeah, absolutely. I've talked to a few people that aren't, familiar with firearms, but they're, like you said, numbers are going up and people, new shooters wanting to get into it or whatever. But, you can tell they're apprehensive to it because, it's a tool just like anything else. But just like you're saying, you're a kid, a 10-year-old kid isn't just going to want to walk up to a circular saw and pick it up and start, even though that thing can take your life. There's something about a firearm that, because I like what you're saying, just, makes children want to, unless they're taught properly and, explained, they're explained in a way that, look, this is a tool, it can cause a lot of harm, but it's not going to cause harm unless, you make a mistake or.
It's that mysticism. And, without going too deep down the rabbit hole of America, the state of our country right now, I am not a member of any political party, truth be told. I hate all of them. But as I see it, I think, celebrating weakness and getting rid of the things that make people understand. And I don't mean, for boys or girls specifically, I mean for everybody, children, adults, men, women, whatever. I think there's so much of an issue of weakness being celebrated and people being taught, you shouldn't suffer. And I think if we look back at, the literature of any author worth reading, they said in anything they ever, were interviewed or in their writing alone, that the time of suffering is when they developed and grew the most, and it's where their best stories come from. And, if we talk about our deployments, a good day where we were well fed and slept good and maybe, got to watch a football game or something, those aren't the stories that shaped you or that lead you to that experience. The suffering is those hard times. And I think if we still understand that you have to make people suffer in boot camp or after school or, what have you, if you understand you have to suffer to excel at athletics or education or anything else, why would we separate that from society where suffering is taught to be this thing that should always be avoided? And, it's cliched, but pain teaches, not to the degree of, harming or hazing or anything like that, but taking my daughter out and we hike and she's a little, she's 7, so a little too young to put a pack on yet, but I make her walk. I make her hold her own food, water, whatever she's got. And I really do feel like that sets people up or sets children up for a much more successful future, because ultimately, whatever we want to pretend, the world doesn't give a shit. The vast majority of people are good. The vast majority of people have good intentions. But at the same time, I think we owe it to ourselves to contribute to the greater good by being capable ourselves, whether it be, knowledge, brawn, compassion, whatever. And I think those are the things that we should really be celebrating more now. And I think specifically for the veteran community, combat veterans especially, it's, there was a couple years, especially around the times of my divorce. Now my daughter's gone, I'm glad for this part, but I bet you I drank a bottle of whiskey a day. And, I never thought of doing anything stupid, but at the same time, I was not building myself. That's just tearing yourself down. And I think when I took the time to make the right kind of friends, because obviously that support network is just drastically important. And some of the guys we know that unfortunately made the wrong choice. I think the lessons you should take from that are, make your suffering is going to happen either way. So you either make yourself suffer in a negative way with dependencies or weaknesses, or you make yourself suffer in a way that may be a really long death hike or super strenuous workout or finishing a book in a set time frame to make yourself dedicate to those things. I think we have to take suffering as a positive and teach ourselves to suffer in the right way. And, after we get done with this, I'm going to be going to the gym now that my daughter's gone, and I'm going to spend an hour and a half just hazing the ever-loving shit out of myself. And, I'm going to come home, drink some water, feel great, read a book, go to bed. And if anything, we also owe it to the future generations and our children and everybody else. But even if you look at it from a selfish standpoint, just putting yourself through positive suffering is, in my opinion, the greatest thing we can do to stay on the right track and, set up for a better future for everyone, not just us.
Yeah, that's one of the biggest things that I always harp on, is that we've taken out this idea of ritual, whether it be from something as trivial as, picking up after yourself. We've removed that entirely, completely. I think part of it too is just we began to embrace technology as this life-saving, mechanism, which really has just shown us who we really are deep down inside. And a lot of it's getting twisted. I think, now more than ever, we're all connected. I think that connection, though, is very, very artificial. It's always based off some external, narrative being played out. Going back to what you're talking about in terms of, like the apprehension that we have today in terms of like the gun, guns and stuff like that. There's some sadistic shit taking place. There's some companies out there that are creating modifications or mods, games that are literally rewriting history. So games are the new books. And there was an article that came out in 2020 called Gamifying Extremism, and it's basically rewriting what took place in the Balkans. So there's an entire history it's a revisionism taking place. And so when you get people who have certain biases and prejudices against a particular other group, right? For example, I think both my take, I'm unaffiliated. I don't believe both in the Democratic or the Republican Party at all. I think it's just one giant joke. I think it's two sides of the same coin.
Absolutely. Two wings of the same buzzard.
Yeah. And so when you take those kinds of concepts, those biases and prejudices, or even just the amount of stuff that's just been spewed out either by, people that you emulate or try to emulate, is going to be reinforced by those kinds of revisionistic types of narratives being portrayed within, the gaming industry, or these modifications, that are like subsets of the entire gaming industry. And it's just like, now the whole game is, changed. A 12-year-old can be a fucking general, and all they have to do is create their own algorithm to put into a gaming system. And then all of a sudden, through the use of technology, spewed out whatever they want, they can assemble. And that's how you get things like swatting, which is obviously going to take, the mainstream media by storm, because it's something that's out of their control. And so that restriction, I think a lot of it has to deal with, we've replaced these rituals with these, life-saving mechanisms, or these so-called life-saving mechanism, without realizing that human nature has remained the same since day one. And the further we in place, or I talk about like hyper reality, right? We can't really distinguish what is real and what is not real, especially now in a mediated environment. And so the further we go down this route, the more polarized we're going to become as we see these kinds of topics come up. And I kind of wanted to ask you, and I know it's a hot topic, but for me, like, for example, I'm not a huge guns guy, because that's not my thing. I like mental health, like farming. I like
absolutely,
but I still know how to wield one. I did a lot of, when I was contracting, I was all about the pistol life. And so for me, it's just something that I've kind of ignored, even though I know how to use it. Right. So what do you think is taking place currently right now with, the Biden administration? I know they're putting out a lot of crazy stuff in terms of like the policies that they want to enact. Do you think that's just a flex, or you think that's just like a legitimate thing?
I would say it's posturing, and I would almost say, in my opinion, now there's quite a few. The NRA is and always has been trash. They are absolutely Wayne LaPierre, who was the head of it, is one of the biggest pieces of shit I've ever had the misfortune of meeting in person. I I can't say enough negative things about the NRA as an organization. They care about money. They have never, ever in their history been for our gun rights. There are great organizations, specifically for North Carolina. You got Grassroots NC, gunpolicy.org. There are, quite a few good. One of my best friends is actually working on the legal side of some of that stuff now. I would say, like most things in DC, it's posturing and creating division. And I think almost expanding on a little bit of where you started with the video game and revisionist stuff, I would say for the positivity of us as Americans and for everything else, and, they say celebrate variety, celebrate diversity, celebrate culture, when in practice, the media, the mainstream corporate media, the politicians of every party, of everything, intentionally divide us and turn us against each other, because if we realized that we weren't that different, then we'd turn on them. And I think what we need to do is, if, for example, if I go to, Black friends, Hispanic friends, Asian friends, if I went to any of their cultural things, I've been to a couple quinceañeras, I've been to a bat mitzvah, I've been to, different nationality and cultural things, I've never had a bad time. And I would say any of them that I would take to, like, my culture, Highland Games, or, stone lifting, which is a major thing, part of the fitness stuff that I enjoy as well. I've got a whole backyard full of Atlas stones. They're not going to have a bad time. And I think, honestly, we almost need to get to the point of who gives a shit what they're doing. I do think HR 127, I believe it is, which is specifically the anti-gun bullshit they're pushing now, it's so outlandish that they do that on purpose because they know it's not going to pass. What it is going to do is going to get donations for pieces of shit like Nancy Pelosi and Dianne Feinstein and all these other people that know nothing about, and demonstrably on video cannot give you a single characteristic that they are trying to ban. So they are putting things in writing to ban that they themselves don't know what they are. Now, to me, anyone that would legislate on something they don't have an understanding of should immediately be nullified from any position of authority. If you would legislate and dictate the future and people's lives off something you yourself have no understanding of, you're a tyrant. Like, there's no other way around it. And, I'm not saying tyrant in the way those 200 idiots in DC or any of that kind of stuff. I'm not saying tyranny in that way, but tyranny in a, why do we listen? Right? If all of us said, hey, my neighbor doesn't look like me, isn't from the same place I am, but we get along, we look out for each other's kids, we get each other's mail if you're out of town, like, why would that not be true on a larger scale? If my interactions with the average American is positive every day, then why can't they be with the rest of the citizenry? Why do I have to be convinced that I'm wrong, they're right, this should be celebrated, this should be hidden, when instead the only authority they have is what we submit to them. If we just say, nah, we're not going to do that, or, no, we're not going to keep arguing, no, we're not going to hear you turn us against each other, we're just going to be Americans and kind of keep on keeping on. You know what I mean? Like, it's, of course, oversimplified, but in reality, I think that's the only way we can go forward. And I think there was a time that, maybe not published that way, but, yellow journalism arguably led us into the Spanish-American War. So it's not like it's something new. It's always been that way. I think at previous generations just understood well, and also the information not being disseminated as quickly, I'm sure, helped with that. But I think they had a better understanding of who really gives a shit what people I've never met that don't know me, don't care about me. Who cares what they say? Like, I love my neighbor. I'm going to continue to love my neighbor. I'm going to continue looking out for everybody. And if somebody wants to do something that doesn't affect me, or some agreement between two consenting adults that doesn't involve children, of course, then why should I give a shit? Or what right do I even have to give a shit? I think it's just vital now more than ever that Americans realize that we're on the same team. We're all in it together. And, who is on the other side of my street is very, very much so more important than who's in DC. But specifically, the long-winded answer to your question, HR 127 is probably not going to be shit. We still need to fight it. We still need to be vigilant towards it. But it's so draconian that it's almost impossible to think they knew it would. I mean, they had to know that there's no way it's going to pass. It just can't.
Something I've thought about. I mean, you probably have more information on it than, anytime they try to propose like gun legislation like this, like if anyone asks me about it, because I think, I know what I'm talking about. I'm just like, there's no, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. How, as far as manufacturing of firearms and firearm accessories in the U.S., even though just like you were explaining, they're taxed at such a high level already, how much does that, provide to our infrastructure in our government? If they're to ban assault weapons and put all these, restrictions on manufacturers from making certain magazines and all this, what kind of impact would that have on our economy?
I would say, so there are a couple local economies that would be affected greatly. Memphis is kind of a rail hub. And if you remember, I mentioned something about munitions. That's not just civilian. Start dialing back on munitions. Memphis as a city, which already does admittedly suck, but that the failing infrastructure we have of railway anyway would be hurt by that. I think if we look at a more simplified level, some of the most American-made, America first people you can imagine are gun owners. And for that reason, good gun manufacturers specifically seek out American steel, American IP, American this, American that, right? So with it, two of the three companies I worked for, we had in-house metallurgical capabilities to know where our steel came from, where any of our materials came from. And we intentionally rooted out anything that was not American sourced, that could be, obviously. In some ways, if you want a wood stock with ebony wood, you're not going to get it from the U.S., right? So there are some logical deviations from that. But for the most part, anything that could get U.S. made, we did. And I know that a lot of industries aren't that way. So I would say with guns being such a, even getting past being a central part of America as a culture, just so much of American manufacturing is related to it. I would say not to the degree of, you got a lot of the automakers in Detroit. Well, a lot of Detroit's collapse, from the auto industry were those companies that existed to support that industry, right? If you're in, Detroit making upholstery and all of your fixtures and jigs and dies and everything are specifically geared to this company and they go under, they go away, you're gone too. Right. So I think raw materials being sourced American, there are probably very few industries. And as a matter of fact, coming from manufacturing for so many years, I don't know of any that are even remotely prioritize American manufacturing more than firearms and related accessories and industry. So I could definitely see some secondary and tertiary effect outcomes that just destroy American manufacturing further than politicians already have.
Right.
Again, I'm not going to go hardline one side or the other because it's both sides of the aisle have destroyed American manufacturing intentionally for their own profit. You've got unions, and everybody has the example of a union being the coal mine and keeping everyone whatever. Some of the greatest coal revolutions weren't unions. They were just people rising up, as it should be. I can say, and this is my opinion, I'm not going to say I speak for either of y'all, but in any manufacturing capacity I've been involved in, unions have resulted in a lower quality, more expensive product. And I think that culture being pushed so hard in modern American society has been harmful to it as well. And I think one of the last industries that demonstrates a higher quality without that is the gun industry as well. So I would say there are a lot of, second, third order things that we can't predict that would come from that. Right. They can try to restrict certain things. Trump was supposed to be the most 2A president of all time. And while the bump stock is just a stupid little novelty thing, he did unilaterally just get rid of it. So we haven't had anybody on our side, even some of the Republican heroes like Ronald Reagan was not pro-gun by any stretch and did quite a few anti-gun measures. So we can't look to politicians to prevent things like this. It has to be, it sounds cliched and it's like this for a lot of causes, but it has to come down to education. Americans have to understand manufacturing. They have to understand what it means. They have to understand what guns really are, how how they can be used safely, how per the FBI's own statistics, it was a couple years ago is the last time I really followed it heavily, but it was, like 200,000 times a year, guns were used in a crime, and that includes suicide. So like 200,000 times. And I'm close. That's not the specific number, but it's very close to that. And per the FBI, they were used to prevent a crime by, civilians, to include police or anyone else in American citizenry, to a factor of like 2.5 to 8 million times. So, it's one of those things. Data alone will show you, and just the idea of sometimes it being called gun violence and stuff like that. Like, violence is violence. Armed robbery went up drastically in both England and Australia when they came after guns, Canada as well for some of their more restrictive measures. And in every case, people go, well, eventually the gun violence went down. Sure. But violence continued to go up and has continued to go up since. So you can, semantically say, oh, well, without the guns, there's no gun violence. True. But violence continues to go up. Armed robbery goes up. Colonel Jeff Cooper, for all the pros and cons about him as a man, more pros, I would say. But Colonel Jeff Cooper had a famous quote that I'm paraphrasing a little bit that was, the gun is civilization. The gun is the only thing that puts the 98-year-old 100-pound woman on a level playing field, somewhat, with a 6'6" linebacker that weighs 300 pounds. And, that is factual with proficiency. And I always tell people, don't just buy a gun, right? Even if it's not with me, I don't care. Get training, get an understanding of how to use it safely, how to employ it safely, how to store it safely. And, ultimately I want gun culture to flourish in this country again, because it is what we were founded on, and obviously I have some bias that, as a kid, probably from the age of 5 or 6 on, I had a 22 walking around the woods before they gave me a pellet gun. And truth be told, I did way dumber shit with the pellet gun once I got that. So, I think culturally where I grew up, there's very little issues with guns. And it's just because we all were born and raised that way. I remember in high school, every truck having a deer rifle in the back window and us leaving school early if it was season. It's one of those things where the same people that would argue prohibition doesn't work in regard to drugs or alcohol, which is absolutely true. History has demonstrated for its entirety that prohibition of anything doesn't work. How could those same people think that works with guns? I just, can't wrap my mind around it. And I think ideologically, we're not going to overpower those people. We just have to keep showing them the logic of, hey, if you don't think prohibition works in this case and you say it has never worked, then why would you assume or be convinced that somehow it's going to work in this one instance and a micro example of the entire world? It's just not practical.
Yeah, those people are totally detached. I don't think they understand. They just don't understand.
No, and the other side of the spectrum with talking about guns and video games and movies, again, I would argue that, as you were saying, and I'm not too clued into the gaming side of things, but I know you're right because I've seen some examples of it. The revisionist history and culture now in video games or movies or pop culture or anything else, like, prime example, and it was intentionally a cheesy movie and it was a good movie, but that Overlord that came out recently with Black and White and everybody else jumping into Normandy, well, that's not how it happened. And I would argue it's more harmful to propagate that kind of thing than it would be to, I want to say Guy Ritchie or somebody's making a movie in the next year or two about, they were the Brooklyn Hellraisers, Brooklyn Hellstorm, something like that. But the first Black infantry regiment to fight in World War I, and they were one of the only regiments to not give up any ground whatsoever. I
saw the trailer for that. That shit looked gnarly. Which I had no idea. Yeah, I just saw it last night, and I was like I had no idea that this was even a thing.
Yeah,
that's crazy.
It's kind of going back to what we said a little bit ago. Is it really that we benefit when we divide and argue with each other, or is it more benefit for us to all realize, hey, we can celebrate the shit out of each other, right? Yeah. Like, I think we can all argue it's hard to get much whiter than a hillbilly from Appalachia, but hell yeah, you talk about those Brooklyn guys destroying the damn Huns, never giving up any ground. I want to celebrate those men. I want to learn their history and their culture. If it's Tuskegee Airmen, if it's, the black sailors in Pearl Harbor that made such a vast life-saving accomplishments they had and stuff like that. It's the Native Americans that were involved, the Navajo Code Talkers being one of the most prominent. But it's not just that. Like, so many cultures have come together to make this country what it is and make our history what it was, that instead of trying to pretend that there is no difference, that we've never done anything, show what we can do together. Right.
Yeah. Well, that kind of, just to tie that into something you were saying earlier about, being able to engage with people from all different backgrounds and all enjoy yourselves and have a good time. I think so many people nowadays, civilians, veterans, even some, they don't know how to identify. They're not able to form their own opinions. They wait to hear someone else's opinion before they have one for themselves. And I think, like you said earlier, going through a struggle in life is how you find yourself. That's how you develop your own character. And even though we probably can't really fathom what some of these previous generations of fighters and warriors went through, there is still a common understanding because we've been through our own experience that can relate to that. And I think, there's this saying that, tough times make hard men, easy times make weak men. And just like you said earlier, this is a very peaceful time in history. And you have a new generation of humans that don't have to necessarily go through any real type of struggle, and they don't know who they are. And it's just, that's, to me, one of the most scary things, people just don't know how to react to situations, and even how to react to each other. Just like you were saying about, the pit team thing in Iraq and doing that side and engaging with Iraqis on that level, it developed this understanding with you, how to treat people and how to look at people differently. Unless someone can go through that at whatever level, they're never going to have that type of life experience. They're locked in their room, or they're inside their house, going to school on a computer, not engaging with other human beings. I mean, it's just it's a very scary time, honestly.
And you're absolutely right, and I agree. I think that kind of ties us into looking at modern veteran culture, right? Where, I love supporting veteran businesses. I love supporting, veteran podcasts. I love all this stuff, and it's awesome. But I think, specifically in the wonderful memes of like Bro Vet Starter Pack, like all those things, right? We can all laugh at those and appreciate them. But I think we really need to remember that our experiences need to be a contributing factor to who we are as men and women versus the sum of who we are, right? So, speaking from personal experience, I'm 34 years old. My time in the Marine Corps was like 4.5 years with the extension. So if I let every decision I ever make, if I let every facet of who I am as a person, as a man, as an American, as whatever, if I let that be the sum of all those things, then I'm drawing on a minuscule comparative amount of my experience to make every decision. And I think that's wrong. But inversely to that, I think if we truly want to celebrate the warrior culture, warrior ethos, the thing that the Marine Corps is great for history versus every other branch, I think that's one of the greatest things the Marine Corps does, is teach you that, to appreciate those things. I think I'm doing more for warrior ethos and culture if I step in and break up a fight between two idiots. If I, something as small as see an older lady reaching up for something on a shelf and you grab it for her, stop your neighbor from getting robbed. Like even if it's not something aggressive like that, it can be as small as being a better, more courteous driver, right? Like all those little bitty things are just like our life experiences adding to the sum of who we are. And warriors aren't supposed to be, in my mind, or any historical reference we want to use, aren't supposed to be some braggadocious secular little thing, right? Like how many, Plato, Socrates, how many people do we need to tell us you can't separate your warrior culture? And while society to an extent has done that, I think we've done that to ourselves too. And we can't control what everyone else does, right? When I wake up in the morning, I don't have a say in what everyone else in the world is going to do. I do have a say in what I'm going to do. So considering the majority of the people I interact with on a day professionally know, hey, he's a Marine, right? They don't know everything, but they know I was in the Marine Corps. They know I'm a hillbilly, whatever, right? So combine those things, what they see is going to sway that opinion of what that is. If I look out for them, if they see me do some, be kind to others, but at the same time be willing to, put down great violence when necessary. If they see that, then that to them is the measure of a warrior. And that is how we reintegrate our culture into the society. Right now, if something so small as your neighbor that knows you're a veteran, combat veteran specifically, however much they know about you, right? If they know that and they see you being kind to just people passing by, or they see you taking care of your own shit, then that will affect how they look at everyone else from that example, just like we would, right? That's right or wrong. That is how humans have developed as a society and as a species. What I see from an example of something is how I'm going forward, immediately perceive certain things. And that has been used as a negative connotation, but it can also be positive, right? If I am the representation of a Marine, of what some people would call a warrior, or, what have you, then make that a positive one, right? And I think me personally, I like to throw in the hillbilly stuff all the time because I want people to know hillbillies can also read, but also, right. Also for the Marine thing, like I'll joke about the dumb grunt stuff, but at the same time, I do not want to ever feel pride for myself. I want to feel pride that I have furthered the cause of what I represent, whether that be a Marine, an American, a human being, a man, whatever it is. And obviously I fall short, more often than not. I'm far from anything perfect or even positive all the time, right? But if we take the time to wake up and just be the positive thing that you want to see, right? That cliched thing, but it's true. And it's not going to be buzzwords. It's not going to be some sort of, bro-centric thing. It's just going to be wake up, do the right thing, handle your own shit. And until one of us can perfectly say, hey, I woke up and everything I did today was for the greater good. I was positive all day. I helped the world today. Until we can say that every day, we should really be more reticent, and maybe I've even been in some cases in this conversation, to say anything negative or put anything negative towards anything else. And I certainly don't live up to that standard. So in all fairness, I don't think I can be too critical of anyone. So, over the simplified version, handle your own shit. And if we can do that, I think whether it be gun rights, whether it be the state of the country, whether it be veteran suicide, whatever it may be, right? And, how many times have the three of us even posted or texted or done something to say, hey, if you need help, reach out, fucking call us, text us, do what you got to do. And, I'm sure we've all been on that side of the phone when the phone rings, right? And you feel good that you could do it. But at the same time, that is not changing the outcome. Yeah. Us instead making what a veteran is a positive, strong-willed contribution to our culture and society, I think that will have a greater effect on that outcome. And, that's ultimately like what I've been kind of checking out of y'all's podcast and, some of the stuff y'all have written, especially you, Herrera. I think that's awesome. And I think that's what we need more of. It doesn't need to be, hey, this is veteran culture, look at us. It needs to be, hey, here's what I would like to do for you. And, oh, this is my background, but I want to do this because it's the right thing. And then, that second or third order effect is they see your background, they see your community, and it doesn't become that damaged, guy that's been through some shit. And quite frankly, all those guys that play into that, oh yeah, I'm a veteran, I've got, issues with this, issues with that. It's a little callous, but fuck you. Like, don't be the victim. if we want to talk about how American culture and Western culture has made everybody celebrate victimhood, don't play into that. Like if you're facing that unopened bottle of whiskey and the other alternative is going out and hazing the shit out of yourself, I know which one you're going to feel better after. And anyone smart enough to be breathing knows which one you're going to feel better after either. So choose what feels good, you know?
Yeah. I've written down extensively my personal notes, and I'm probably going to say it whenever I finish up this book, but the veteran and operational community are just as responsible for the suicides that have taken place and the mental health and the entire narrative of who we are today. Like, I'm not some sick fuck, you know what I'm saying? Like, obviously I'm going to have some kind of an impact on what took place. You know, you've seen your fucking boy get blown the fuck up and then having to respond
Absolutely.
to that. And I deal with that, but I wake up every fucking day, and I tell this to Paul all the time. You know, it's like I got my process. I wake up every day at 3 a.m. and I start my fucking rituals, and then I'm in the gym, you know, fighting myself so that I can go ahead and get balanced. So when I go to work, it's not I'm bringing my problems in through the doorway. And with that said, too, it's like this idea of the spectacle. Everything is about image. There's no substance. And this is one of the things why I not mess around, but why I study moral philosophy, the ethical standard. JJ did tie buckle, honor, courage, commitment. And I think that the predominant virtue that everyone, and I know this is my opinion, but I think brotherhood should be the premier virtue for any warrior society. Without it, we don't have anything. And there's, you know, some other metaphysical properties that go with that, but it's been tainted completely by these by commodification, by consumerism, right? We use coping mechanisms like, for example, the red, I don't know if you know about Red Day shirts. And I'm not trying to.
Oh, yeah.
Right. So remember everyone deploy. Fuck that. I remember every fucking day, you know, not just one day out of the week on Friday. And I have to put on my shirt. Like every day I think about that stuff. And I also want to hit up too, you know, something that I brought up a few times. The Marine Corps ethical formulation was created through the Army's formation of ethical standards. So they had the FM like 2- whatever, and in 1983 so it started in 1948, and then 1983 was like the last publication. But we got all our ethical standards from the Army. So there's like this common parallel between, you know, sister services that we can create and understand how it flows and how it can still serve us to this day. So I'm a huge, you know, virtue ethicist, you know, and that's the only way that I can process this idea of being good. That's my moral compass. That's the way I traverse the world. Because there are days, man, where it's very difficult to see what I see humans sometimes as cattle. It's just, that's just the way it is. You know, part of that is the process that, you know, of trying to be who I am, trying to distinguish how I am. And there's one more final point that I wanted to make. And this is something that I've been trying to get across to a lot of folks, especially whenever I do like public education in terms of how warfare has changed in the past 20 years. And, you know, we can argue how far that goes back, but since 2016, right after that election, you know, we've had a series of foreign actors or just bad actors that have promoted and subverted this idea of the alt-right or white supremacy. So the Global Disinformation Index did an analysis on 519 sites. And out of those 519 sites, the predominant narratives being told where white supremacy is an issue, is a threat, and there is an anti-Latinx sentiment. So what they're trying to do now is play each other. So what's essentially taking place throughout the country and how these smartphones and how our laptops play into it is they're developing or generating these atmospheres to think that, oh yeah, that big burly Appalachian guy over there, yeah, that's a fucking white supremacist. When in reality, it's not even fucking true. And you have to think, you know, you've had these meta narratives being broke down throughout the histories where now people don't even know what they are, who they are. And you have this rising young generation who plays into group politics and, you know, identity politics. And that's typically what the left is. And, as they bark loud enough, that's what's going to get seen. And so when you have that kind of, ideology playing through along with a mediated level and along with, foreign actors, bad actors, and a lot of it's just regular Americans trolling one another. You're going to generate a lot of fucking hate and discontent. And, once again, this goes back into education, right? Education about what's taking place, how you stay informed, and how you view those kinds of sources. And really, honestly, brutally asking yourself why you feel so emotional about something that's probably not even true, or it's probably irrelevant. And I ask myself that all the freaking time, because I can get into these moments or these moods reading some of the stuff that I do read. And it's like I can't be blanketing every American or everyone who doesn't see my point of view as such as this kind of like enemy or adversary. And that's another part, is that the linguistics that we're using today is totally being revised into meaning as something totally different. And it's like everyone's talking, and I don't think we're understanding what we're actually talking about or saying to one another. And that's why I always revert back to virtue ethics, or just the ethical standard. You speak a language of pain and suffering and brotherhood. I understand that to the core. And it's to the point where I don't even have to talk about it. I can just be in your presence and you understand and I understand. And so,
absolutely.
Can you tell us a little bit, man, of like how you keep in check? Just some tips. I know you train a lot, and I know you deal a lot with firearms, stuff like
that. Well, I think so. Mindset, obviously, being the lead thing of everything. And one point I kind of hammer with my daughter, and I actually did earlier today as well, is what I call the turd analogy. So kind of tying into what you said about how, people are being played against each other, or when one group may be singled out to be the villain in some situation or scenario. And I obviously clean up the analogy for her. But if you were to go in your backyard and step in shit, are you going to stand there and go, well, shit, I've got shit all over my foot. I can't do anything ever again because I've got shit on my foot? Or do you go, I need to get this nasty turd off of my foot and carry on about whatever I was about to do, right? So, some could call it an oversimplification, but I truly don't think it is. I think you have to look at everything at life, and obviously, again, fall short myself on occasion, but I try to always look at it as, don't leave whatever that piece of shit on my foot is, get it cleaned off and carry on with my day, right? So in my house, we don't allow crying or fussing over something frivolous. Otherwise, you go stand in a corner until you decide you want to be logical again, right? So I think the greatest thing we can do is wake up and think about how I am going to interact with any situation that may come up, right? And that's not saying gaming through situations or scenarios. That's just saying, hey, every day is going to have challenges. Every day is going to have trials. Every day is going to have tribulations, right? It just is what it is. So only being able to affect how I interact with those situations and things, I'm going to choose to do those things positively, right? And, the workout stuff, if I don't feel like it every day, because sometimes I don't, I find something to motivate me. Some of the greatest things, I'll pull up, Hafthor Bjornsson doing the 1,000-pound deadlift the first time on that Rogue video on YouTube. I'm surprised I haven't shut down YouTube with how many times I've watched that, right? Or some of these great guys like Jocko Willink or Joe Rogan, or all these other people that are just positive inherently and can lead us to think positively. Inversely to them, though, you can also look at, I got my daughter watching Annie Thorstolder, and I'm sure I butchered her name, but she Icelandic CrossFit athlete. Show that to my daughter, and I go, I've started following her a lot myself, and a rugby player from Australia, Georgia Page, female rugby player, a great video of her just taking a shit mix and just coming back and destroying. And, we, throughout our human history, have drawn on the strength of our peers to, get stronger ourselves. And I think if you don't feel the motivation to do those things, pull up Annie Thorstolder at the CrossFit Games, the fact that she had a baby recently and she's already out there 8-pack abs again, right? A little bit of a crush too, sorry. But, Georgia Page as well. But we can look at these men and women that are just conquering. And if you can't look at that and go, you know what? Yeah, like they're obviously enjoying what they're doing right now and they're feeling good about it. And I can too. And it's one of those where every now and then on like Instagram, I might put up a little workout thing, but it's usually me doing something shitty. And I kind of do the same with shooting too. Like it's, if every week I go out and just pick a few simple drills and go through those, because I think that is important, especially for those of us that legally carry concealed. I think it's super important to maintain that proficiency, right? Just like we all know, if I eat good, I get good out. You don't always make that choice, but we all know if you eat good and clean, you're going to feel better. I think input is the same way. I've gotten to where I choose not to watch something negative. I won't watch news. I won't watch horror movies or any of that stuff. Yeah, sometimes it's just entertainment, but I've just chosen not to be a part of it anymore. If I watch TV, which is kind of rare, it's usually a silly sitcom just to kind of kill some time. I would much rather listen to podcasts. This is the revolution of podcasts. And honestly, a little jealous and envious, and definitely admire that you've done what you've done with it, because it is the future of good information, I think. And, if it's Joe Rogan's podcast or some of the Drinking Bros guys have some good stuff. The American Party podcast with Dan Holloway and Dakota Meyer and a couple of those, guys like that. Find whatever that positivity is to motivate you to do something. Go out and do it. And every day, try to find that one little victory, right? If it's, I ate better than I did yesterday. If it's, I shaved 0.2 of a second, because in competitive shooting, 0.2 of a second will dictate first and 10th place in a match. So if it's 0.2 of a second quicker on one particular set that day, right? Like acknowledge where you faltered and where you failed. But instead of going, that's just what I am the sum of my failures. No, you're not, right? If you're the sum of your failures, we would have all forgotten how to breathe and gone extinct a long time ago. It has to be, what was my victory today? How do I build on that tomorrow? And, you can give somebody all the motivation you want. And if they choose not to listen, it's on them. But tying back to that, how you interact with people, right? Interact positively, be the good, show a kid the right way to interact with a stranger, show, a worker at a store that you're not going to leave a mess for them to pick up, put a buggy back, that putting the shopping cart back is the greatest analogy of the quality of a human being. I really do feel like, and I know it's cliched meme and everything, but it's so true. Like, put the buggy back every day, right? Clean up your house, take care of people around you, look out for each other. Don't carry a gun because of fear. Carry a gun, in my case, because, I'm more proficient than probably the vast majority of people. So if I can interject to positively affect the outcome of a good person that may have otherwise been kind of fucked up, well, I got to do it. And I think veterans understand that more than anybody, that you have to reach that point in your mind where you go, I may be fucked, but statistically I might be. If I don't act, they definitely are. So I'm going to go with the maybe, right? Find that maybe in your day-to-day life. If maybe I'll drink too much and not feel good tomorrow, or definitely I'll exercise and make a better choice, right? Look at the statistical odds, take the outcome.
That's good shit, man.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that really just is the sum of it.
No, that was pretty. I like the way you just. I feel like that's a good end cap there. I mean, you seem like you've always been locked on, and not that we all hadn't been through our own trials personally, but definitely good words for somebody that might need to hear them.
Yeah, and absolutely. For any of the guys we know or anybody, if I don't know them, I get motivation if I can help motivate somebody else. So, Elijah Henry, Facebook, Instagram, whatever, shoot me a message. If I can help with something, if somebody wants a workout plan, shit, I'll write you a week of stuff you can do with body weight or in a gym, whatever you got. I don't care. And if after that you don't feel positive about it, well, you can't control your past, but you can definitely put your future in a better direction. So.
Yeah, it's good shit, man. Do you really have like stranger first timers try to pick up Atlas stones in your backyard?
Oh God, no.
I'm like, you're going to break somebody's spine, dude.
No. So my garage is essentially like a little Mad Max Thunderdome of fitness stuff. Like I've got the conventional barbells and squat racks. And I'm still a member of like a dozen gyms around here, but it's the Atlas stones are more of a motivator, admittedly, sometimes for new clients that are a little like, I don't know. I can go, hey, watch this. I'm going to put this 300-pound stone on this board. Doesn't that look cool as shit? I can show you how to do that. So it's more of a, hey, this is where I want you to go, not a, let's just go ahead and start throwing this on your shoulder and see what happens. You know? And,
that's awesome.
You know, to the stones, anyone that, I mean, hell, any of you guys that want, I've got the molds to make them. I will be happy to give you instructions, mail you the molds on my dime if you want to make one, because I'll tell you what, the real life applicable movement of taking a stone from the ground to the shoulder and dropping it. Admittedly, when I do it, I hear like my ancestral drums in the background, right? Just how it works. But I think just that act, because there's no, to me, it's a metaphor for life, right? Like when you get a stone off the ground, until it's on your shoulder, you're moving, and you've got to be doing the right posture, the right drop in the hips, get your knees in line, get your fingers spread to spread the weight across your hands, get everything up right. So it's a continuous movement that if you don't do every part of it in the right way and you're not thinking about what you're doing, I mean, quite literally, if I trip and one of those 300s falls on me, I'm dead. So it's there's severity to it, but I think there's like a pure joy in it too, because it's having to push through that, right? And I think it's a great motivator to look at life that way as well. Like once the ball starts rolling, you ain't stopping it. So you can either be on the right side of it or get crushed by it. Pick.
Right.
Yeah, that's also a good. Yeah, have you ever heard of Sisyphus? He was cursed. He was cursed by Zeus. Ago. Yeah, so Sisyphus cheated death and did all sorts of things and pissed off Zeus. So Zeus ended up cursing him, and his curse was rolling a boulder uphill. And every time he got close to putting it at the peak, the boulder would roll back down. So Sisyphus' curse would do that for eternity. Jocko Willink, Joe Rogan, all those dudes use Sisyphus as, that's what you're trying to achieve. Not something in futility or vanity, but that's the progress that you have to put into your life. Like that's what you have to strive for. Is you're always, iron sharpens iron, right? You're always trying to better yourself. And that's one of the reasons why I like deadlifting. It's not, it's something cool about, picking up a small car,
I tell people all the time, if you could do one exercise and one only, if you could just deadlift, you would be all around relatively fit. Like there's a reason it's the king of lifts.
Yeah. And I love deadlifting, man. I do it at least once a week. The farthest I've ever gotten was 475, man. And I was so stoked about it. And then I had to drop weight. I was getting the contract again. I had to drop a lot of weight. So I was like, I lost all my mass. I'm like little bit, little by little, I'm getting it back. I've always peaked at 405, but I don't feel comfortable going up any higher without having a crew of people in COVID-19, man. It's just slaughtered gymming, like slaughter.
Even, and in regards to the fitness thing too, it's like you said, you got to have a team in every facet of life. But I think with the fitness side of things, deadlifting is, the great example, like the Atlas stone of doing what you're doing. But at the same time, don't think of it always as, I want to get the most weight possible, because God knows I spent years doing that too. But I think right now I'm probably in close to the best shape of my life. And it's really been when I realized the whole goal of it is to do what you can do right now. If you're one of those, if bodybuilding is your thing and hypertrophy is the only thing you think about, just getting that muscle as big and swollen and defined as possible, then more power to you. That's a sport. Enjoy it, whatever. But I think, like me, I want to be able to take my daughter on big, long, 50-mile hikes on the AT. I want to be able to, like, I pick the metric I use for myself, and it's kind of cheesy, but I want to be able to pick the fattest person that may be around me in public and load them into the back of a truck in the event of an injury or mass cas or something like that. Like, right, I want I measure my fitness off of the biggest person I'm likely to interact with. Could I load them onto a vehicle? Could I jump, climb, or get under anything that I may have to in, again, the event of some catastrophic event, right? So if you can lift yourself over something, swim under something, lift the biggest thing around you, person-wise, that dead weight, right? If you could load them up, even if it takes a certain movement, right? Because it can be the complexity of your movement, not just raw power. Whatever those things are, like that should be my fitness goal. You should be able to just stop, drop, run 3 to 5 miles right now. It doesn't have to be fast, but you should be able to do it. You should be able to anything you care about, which should be all of your fellow men. You should be able to load one of them up onto something if they needed to be taken out of there to get help, right? It should be all of those applicable real life scenarios where, the Marine Corps going through CQB training isn't because every single day you're going to be kicking indoors, but it's because with the one time you need to know how to do that, you're going to need to know how to do that. And you got to be ready regardless of how many times it happens, right? That's why no matter what level asset you get to, they still practice the basics all the time. So if all the decades and centuries of military understanding have taught people that, hey, you need to repeat worst case scenario so you're prepared for it, then, and that's the focus of that force, then why not make that applicable to every facet of life, right? Why not measure my fitness off what I can do to take care of someone that I may be around? What if, go out and get medical training. I know right now, Kerry Davis owns Dark Angel Medical. I was very fortunate to do a 2-day class with him a couple years ago for a company I was working for in Austin. And Dark Angel Medical's got a lot of, I'm unaffiliated with them. I just mentioned them because I know them and I know the training's awesome. Like, betterment isn't just fitness, eating clean and all that stuff. Like, get medical training, like be an asset to your community, because ultimately, if you want to live in a good place, you've got to be that. You have to be a contributing factor to that being a good place. So get medical training, like dive into, if it's reading, if it's podcasting, if it's the awesome stuff you two guys are doing, if it's being a knuckle dragger that shoots stuff and tries to fix stuff like me, like whatever it is, find what you can do to contribute to what you want shit to be. Because if you are not contributing to the overall betterment, then you are stagnant or worse, a piece of shit, and shouldn't expect everything around you to be better than you're willing to make it.
Yeah, for sure.
But
in a way, man, it's weird. Kind of like you said, you don't want to be calling anybody out or anything like that, but I think there's just this common understanding, because I feel like you're saying a lot of things that I feel like I think on a daily basis, and I just wish, like, it's not that I want to change people. I just question myself why they're like that. Things I've said before, just interacting with people and being just a good person, just nice. You don't need to be, everybody goes through shit, has shitty days, whatever, but you don't have to dump that out onto someone else, especially if you don't know them. It's not a stranger, they're a stranger to you. They don't deserve that shit.
Absolutely. And
it's fine. I mean, and maybe, like I've said, maybe it is the circumstances that we've gone through that kind of just let us look at life a little differently. Some people don't have that perspective, because maybe they just haven't seen how bad it can get. I'm not trying to sit there and say any of us have been through the not comparing anything here, but I'm just saying some people, I think they just don't realize how great we all have it, to wake up every day and have all your limbs and not be, deathly bedridden, ill. That's something I've said to Herrera a while before. It's like I almost enjoy when I get injured, because for that period of time when I'm injured, it makes me appreciate when I'm not. It's not that I don't try to do. It's not that I don't try to, do that when I'm feeling 100%. But when you're not 100%, I almost enjoy it, because I'm just like, damn, it'd be great if I didn't sprain my ankle or something, and I felt like I could walk around at 100%. It's just, I don't know. It's those little things, those things that you can show that level of appreciation for in life. Just little routine things, man. That's living to me,
Absolutely. And, you mentioning that, how I say it, like I've tried to not say people I viewed negatively or brands or anything like that. And, there's obviously the protect yourself, don't
Right.
slander anything. But I think more importantly, it is things have as much sway in your thought and your mind and your day to day as you give them. And when I know, the Captain Minguses, the now Sergeant Major Williamsons, the Clarks, the Turpins, the, infinite number of guys that we could all name, like when I know all of them, would I rather someone hear the name of someone that wasn't what they should have been? Or would I rather someone hear the names of people and brands and things that they should know about, right? That they should hear about. Like if, we talk about that Ramadi deployment, you talk about Yale and Herder, right? During that VBID. If we want to focus on negative aspects of life, then the time that we could have looked at situations like that and been grateful that, we are alive and we do get to tell the story and we do get stronger. We do get to be a positive effect on the world. If we waste time on that negative side of things, that's time that could have been spent on the positives. And, again, like we've all three said in this conversation, we have to be what we want the outcome to be. And, if we're not, then we just need to get out of the way.
Yeah, 100%. Well, good shit, man. I don't know. Not that I don't enjoy having this conversation. I could sit here and fucking, bounce shit off for hours, but I appreciate you coming and talking to us. I know, yeah, I know it. Like I said, anybody that might be listening that didn't know you or does, know you and probably would enjoy getting to hear your aspect. And if it, it kind of something me and Herrera have talked about, if this makes anybody from the unit or anybody with, feels like they want to come on here and share their piece, the more the merrier. Any time that you can get. I told Herrera, I said, we're going to have fucking all the 2.8 on here on a bit. It's just going to look like a fucking little fucking half-inch grid on the screen, and it's going to be everybody in here just shooting shit. If that's what it takes, because like you said, and we've talked about it before, this whole doing fucking nothing wrong with doing 22 push-ups and shit.
Of course.
You should be doing 2.8 and then at least, a couple for chesty, but that's not helping. That's not the way. Just saying, hey, call me if you're in a fucking shitty circumstance, then, that doesn't work. It doesn't work. And, Vanessa is a perfect example of that. I talked to more of my senior guys after that happened that I hadn't talked to. Tremendous respect for a lot of the guys. I hadn't even fucking spoken. I mean, I haven't spoken to you since probably Smoke Deck in Ramadi, and yeah. And it's not that that's a bad thing. I think everybody just kind of sits there and thinks, okay, yeah, they got it. But even if they don't have it, they're not going to, most of the time, not going to let you know. They're not going to reach out. They're just going to internalize and do the thing. And, that one was kind of a big shocker for me because Vanessa was a big influence to me. And never would have saw that coming from him. And I talked to a ton of my senior guys about it, and they all said the same shit. And I'm just like, this doesn't work. This isn't working. The way we do it isn't working. But you know what? Ever since Herrera reached out to me, I was just like, you want to fucking shoot this shit? Let's do it. And it's been great. There's been a ton of good feedback. Dudes want to come spit their piece or just bullshit. We don't have to talk about anything. I'm very grateful you shared your knowledge about, your firearms industry knowledge with us, because I would have had fucking no clue about the gunpowder shit unless I just thought about it. I mean, I figured the whole ammo shortage was, people just stocking like they did, and they're scared about shit. And I know that does contribute, but yeah, it's crazy. But anyway, appreciate you coming and talking with us, man. It was a good conversation.
Yeah, no, I loved it. And, even if no one ever heard it, you got to have a conversation with two of my boys I ain't talked to in a long time. So that's good enough reason, right?
Right.
And last thing I'll say is that Vanessa one, that one really, really sucked because so Vanessa, we were boot camp together, SOI together, fleet together, and again, a situation will let you take from it what you choose to take from it, without going into any of the other stuff that we've all beaten into the ground about it. That was one that woke me up a lot, albeit recently, but woke me up a lot to that is not one I ever predicted. In fact, I had conversations with him about the exact opposite shit. So that one is one that, as cliched as it is, if saying shit, reach out to us, as cliche, like, again, reach out. Like, I cannot promise I can give anybody a good answer or the right answer. I'm an idiot trying to figure this shit out on my own. But at the same time, I promise I'll listen. I know you guys would. And I am not going to sugarcoat or anything. If you do call me and tell me you're thinking about it, I probably am going to call you a pussy. And then we're going to go into why you're being a pussy and how you fix it. And, if that 22 push-up thing made a difference, then by all means, everybody needs to do it. Like, do whatever we got to do. Right. But there's nothing I have found that does better than just camaraderie, and suffering is a reality of life. To tie it back to the beginning, right? In the words of the wonderful press secretary now, to circle back to the beginning of the conversation, if nothing else, suffering is a reality of existence for humanity, and it will always be. I don't care if you are Bill Gates in Greece somewhere hanging out. That man knows some kind of suffering, and no matter what, we all suffer. So you can either suffer positively or you can suffer weakly, and what you choose is the sum of who you are, much more than anything else. So, it is what it is.
Absolutely.